In 1999, the current UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who back then was the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, made the decision to sell half of the UK's gold reserves in a series of auctions between 1999 and 2002. About 400 tons of gold were involved in these sales. Not only was gold highly undervalued back then when the sell-off took place, but in the June 1999 memorandum of the Bank of England it is stated that the gold was sold to the lowest bidder above the lowest accepted price by the central bank. Yes, you hear that correct, that's the lowest bidder, not the highest bidder. The timing of the gold sales could not have been worse. When the sales took place, gold prices were at their lowest levels in a 20 years period. The sales are being referred to as Brown's bottom. It is hard to believe the UK's gold was sold to maximize profit for its citizens. The sales were publicly announced on May 7, 1999, when the price of gold stood at $282 an ounce. The advance notice of the substantial sales drove the price of gold down by 10% by the time of the first auction on July 6, 1999. It is acknowledged that with a large part of the proceeds of the gold sales, euros were bought. With these gold sales, the euro that back then was being introduced was propped up substantially, and we can be sure that a lot of the UK's gold was ended up using as liquidity for continuing the gold carry trade and forward sales of gold that the Federal Reserve was engaged in. Although not a confession to suppress the price of gold, the Washington Agreement is a open proclamation by central banks that they will work together in order to prevent the gold price from falling due to their official combined gold sales. In the Washington Agreement of 1999, Western central banks agreed to restrict their combined nation official gold sales and leasings to 400 tons a year. In 2004, this maximum amount of gold that could be sold was raised to 500 tons a year. And notice from this official document that the IMF is not included as a party that signed the Washington Agreement. Some critics, such as the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, however, maintain that the Washington Agreement primary purpose was not to limit central bank gold sales, rather it served a very different purpose. While the agreement's participants said they want to support the price by limiting and coordinating their gold hoarding, in fact they were arranging cash settlements of their gold loans, allowing the bullion banks that had to return the gold they leased from the central bank to settle in cash instead of gold. Through the mechanism of the Washington Agreement, central banks were now able to account for the leased gold which they no longer had possession of and were not getting back anymore. The bullion banks were allowed to settle in cash because if they had been required to settle in gold, they would have had to go to the market and get back the gold, and considering the amount they had to get back, the gold price would have exploded when they were forced to get the gold back. And this would make an end to the gold carry trade and would greatly diminish the value of all government currencies and bonds. In the aftermath of the Washington Gold Agreement, Sir Edward A.J. George, Governor of the Bank of England, was stated saying that central banks had to manage the gold price and that the US Federal Reserve was very active in getting the price of gold down. In the same court case of Howie versus Biss, it is being stated that according to reliable reports received by the plaintiff, Alan Greenspan expressed his desire to hold down gold prices during discussions with representatives of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. In the report on gold issued in May 2002 by the Royal Bank of Canada's Global Investment Management Team, it's been described how the US manipulates the gold price. The report states that the gold price manipulation is unsustainable and that the body of evidence for these manipulation practices is overwhelming. In a 2003 lawsuit against the world's largest gold producer at the time, Blanchett and Company charged Barrick Gold with manipulation of the gold price by using central bank gold. Barrick replied that they could not be sued without the central bank and other bullion dealers present as necessary parties in the court case, and that the central banks had sovereign immunity. They, and I mean Barrick Gold by they, should hold a claim to as well. In the motion, the mechanisms of forward delivery by central banks of forward sold unmined gold and its effect on suppressing the price of gold are described. Barrick's motion to dismiss can be viewed as a confession to the state of the gold market, in which it acted as an agent of the central bank selling their gold to the market. Let me read a small excerpt from page 20 of the document presented here. I quote, "Termination of the forward sales contract would leave the bullion banks with no right to recover the promised gold from the gold producers, yet they will remain obligated to repay the borrowed gold to the central banks. In order to satisfy their obligations to the central banks, the bullion banks would have to purchase gold on the spot market at prices that may be substantially higher than the price at which they sold the borrowed gold. It could expose the bullion banks to monumental financial losses." Unquote. This quote indicates that the increase of the price of gold was a vast problem for bullion banks, considering the vast amount of central bank gold they sold forward to the market. Barrick's motion to dismiss was settled out of court, and shortly thereafter Barrick announced its hedging operations were terminated. Here we have a translated quote from Oleg V. Moshaiskov, deputy chairman of the Bank of Russia, in which he acknowledges carefully that the forces at play on the gold market are not those at play at a normal free market. According to this quote from a written speech of William R. White, the head of the Monetary and Economic Department of the Bank of International Settlements, joint efforts to influence asset prices, like the price of gold, is one of the main purposes of central bank cooperation. In the January 2006 sector report on metals and mining from Chevreux, which is a part of France's largest bank, the findings of GATA have been endorsed. In the report, it is stated that central banks have covertly selling gold to suppress the price of the yellow metal. In a Bloomberg report from October 4, 2006, Axel Weber, president of the German Bundesbank, is quoted saying, "We have been asked to negotiate with other central banks about potential swap deals involving gold." In the September 2007 gold report from Citigroup, it has also been mentioned that central banks sell gold to cap the metal's price. In the 2008 official report on reserves of foreign exchange and gold, in a footnote gold swaps are actually being mentioned and described. Apparently the Bank of England sees swapped gold still as a part of its gold deposits. In chapter 4 I explained already why this way of accounting for gold swaps is wrong and causes a double accounting of the same gold bars. Here we have the official documentation that proves that the potential problem I highlighted might actually have a basis in reality. Although I will not claim this man was a former insider to the gold suppression scheme, Paul Craig Roberts was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury of the Reagan administration. Apparently he also knows about the gold carry trade instigated by central banks. The last document I will mention is the Federal Reserve's response to the Freedom of Information Act request filed by GATA. This request was aimed at retrieving gold-related VAT documents only. The Federal Reserve answered Gata it was legally entitled to withhold the information asked for about swaps. So when the Federal Reserve withholds information about its gold swap arrangement, it apparently has these type of arrangements and does not want to disclose these with the public. So you see, there are quite a bit of sourced quotes and documents publicly available indicating the gold market for the last 15 years has been manipulated. In the next chapter I will discuss in detail who the culprits in this suppression scheme are.